Hello, welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 91, a group discussion on flute and movement. Today's sponsor is brought to you by J&K Productions. Did you know that not only are they a production company for podcasts, but they are a recording company for musicians? Any musical recording needs that you may have, J&K Productions can fulfill that need. They have all the necessary equipment and expertise to record your next flute recording for college or graduate auditions, competitions, summer festivals, or a flute album. J&K Productions can record any setup imaginable, from solo flute, small chamber, flute and piano, and much more. Consider J&K Productions for your next recording project. Contact them at jkproductions.media. The panelists include Kathy Blocki, who is the creator of KinderFlute, Zara Lawler, who is an interdisciplinary performer through the flute on its feet, Emma Shubin, who is a Dalcroze certified and licensed teacher, as well as the co-founder and director of Integral Steps, and Weronika Balewski, who is an educator who incorporates Dalcroze ideas in her work. Welcome, ladies.
Great to be here.
Great. So this series is really exciting for me because in my past life, I was a ballerina. And I cannot wait to hear how you ladies incorporate movement within your musical world. So let's start there. How did you ladies start incorporating movement within your teaching and or performing?
Well, this is Kathy, creator of KinderFlute. And what prompted me to begin incorporating movement in my classes was the study of the research of Dr. John Ratey and how that aerobic exercise and activity really helps to stimulate neurogenesis, or just the best learning environment possible. So the way we began was just relay races and things like that. And then it morphed into creative movement to portray the music and to get them excited about pieces that are going to be playing later on. So we actually started with relay races.
Oh,
cool. I love that. This is Zara Lawler, and Kathy, I feel like you should write a bio called, or, like a book about yourself called It Started with Relay Races.
Yes.
Anyway, this is Zara Lawler. I am a flutist, and I call myself an interdisciplinary performer because I dance and play and act all at the same time. And I use movement in my performances, on main stage type events where I dance and play at the same time, or in collaboration with other dancers or musicians who move. And I also work with students and helping them learn to move and play at the same time. And how I got started doing that, actually, it was funny, Heidi, when you said that in your former life you were a ballerina. In my former life, I was a gymnast. And I think I just kind of always kept moving. And actually, my very first performance on the flute was an interdisciplinary performance. I had been playing the flute for only a couple of months when my mother, who was an architect, did a presentation at my elementary school about the Tappan Zee Bridge over the Hudson River being built and various buildings having to be taken down or moved to make room for the bridge. And I played London Bridge is Falling Down while a parade of houses drawn by students in the elementary school went by. And so movement and other art forms have always been part of my flute performances.
Wow, so cool. And Emma?
Well, hi there. This is Emma Shubin. I'm a Dalcroze certified and licensed teacher, and I'm also a flutist. For me, the flute has always been a really whole-bodied experience, and the way I approach the instrument is through imagining the music as it would be if it were alive and able to move. When I first went to conservatory, the very first class, part of my elements in my curriculum was a Dalcroze rhythmics class. And I just had this huge light bulb moment where I realized there were methods out there that taught the way that I learned, and that an embodied way of approaching music for me was a key to unlocking and more comfortable communicating music to an audience. And so for me, it really came from this wish to feel more comfortable on the performance stage, and also to be as expressive as I wanted it to be, but without getting in the way of my flute technique or my ability to communicate. How could I combine the use of movement to better understand music and to find a way to be that expressive through my air and through my flute playing? Later in life, after training, I really wanted to also find ways to work with my students that involved all of their types of learning. And so the wish to found a nonprofit like Integral Steps came from this wish to work in a multimodal way with my students and with families and with communities. So now it informs a lot of what we do with the work, not only musically, but through combining different artistic mediums and the use of and consideration of how we learn in all parts of ourselves.
Awesome. And Weronika?
Well, this is Weronika. I have to say I am in this conversation largely because of Emma. So thank you to Emma for helping me be more serious about the Dalcroze education. It's something that I was exposed to in college as well, but really decided to pursue when I saw when I first met Emma, she had been studying Dalcroze for about 10 years, and I saw a huge difference in her performing, how expressive and communicative and fluid it was. And so I initially became interested in studying music through movement and the Dalcroze method for myself as a performer. And then later, it also transferred over to how I teach, because I saw it was making a big impact in my own learning. And I was like, wow, I've really learned so much better when I incorporate movement. I bet this could help my students too. So my path was maybe, it was my own path, more circuitous or less circuitous. It just kind of depends. We all travel into this world in our own way based on our interests as they change over time.
That's amazing. Thank you, ladies, for that feedback and those insights. That's wonderful. And to chime in on what Weronika just said, I resonated with everything that Kathy and Zadie and Emma and Weronika said, but Weronika just mentioned, I learned better. And so that segues beautifully into the second question. If a student were to participate in some sort of movement-based class, is that student more likely to pursue instrumental or vocal studies later? What do you think, Kathy?
Well, I kind of laughed at that question because many of my students begin at age 4 or 5 or 6. So if I rephrase the question a little bit, if a toddler were to participate in a sort of movement-based class, so a lot of my kids that start at like 4, 5, and 6 have participated in kinder music or music emotion or music garden. So I think the kids that have participated in those programs are very likely, they're looking for an instrumental program to be part of. And it just naturally, I have a lot of teachers that come and train that have been teachers in these classes, and they just see it as a natural flow into what we do with the young children and the many movement activities we incorporate into what we're doing.
Wonderful. And what do you think about that, Zara?
What Kathy just said certainly makes a lot of sense to me. I actually don't have a huge amount of direct experience with that, although my own daughter started in Music Together, another one of those early childhood music programs that does a lot of movement in addition to singing and instrumental playing. And it certainly has been a natural flow when she was around 4 to move into instrumental study. And I certainly think, for me, that my take on that question is also, I feel like the breakdown between music and movement sometimes happens later. Kids as children, very naturally move when they hear music. And it's at some point later that they think music means standing still or sitting still and just moving their fingers. And dancing is something separate. So I think something that I would imagine that probably all of the people on this panel are working on is sort of keeping, trying to avoid that breakdown between music and movement by just keeping that natural connection between the two of them going throughout the learning process.
I really resonate with that because I mentioned earlier that in my former life I was a ballerina, but when I finished my ballet studies at 13, 14, and then I picked up the flute, for me as an adolescent, I
compartmentalized.
Yes, I did. I was like, oh, I'm a ballerina. Now I'm a flutist. And there was no connection. And it was unfortunate because it wasn't until my doctoral studies that Dr. Lisa Garner-Santa, for any of you who know her and her playing, she moves so much in her performances in a natural way. And she's like, Heidi, bring that to your performances because it's already in your body. And this light bulb went off and I thought, wait a second, it has always been there, but I cut it off because it was two separate things in my brain.
Yeah, this is Zara again. I sort of two stories about that. One is I had a student who was also, she was maybe 12 and she was a pretty serious ballet student as well as flute student. And she had been studying with me for a little while. And she said, really in this adorably shy voice, adolescent, I saw some of your videos online and you were dancing while you were playing. And I was like, oh yeah. That's cool. Thanks for watching them. And then she said, my teacher told me you can't dance and play at the same time.
Oh no.
And it's like, you never want to trash talk the former teacher, but I was like, oh, well, I guess you can. And then she just had this expression on her face, and I said, would you like to dance and play at the same time? And she was like, yes, I would. And so we choreographed a piece for her because it was just like, oh, this kid has been told she's not allowed to do that. And, and you can, and I, I'm sure we all have had moments, and I actually was just working with a student yesterday where she was working on the Mendelssohn Scherzo, and I wanted her to not waste any of her oxygen by moving the flute while she played. So I was standing there trying to get her, to do the opposite, to not move while she plays. Like, there are good reasons not to do it. But it was funny to also then, be able to give a student permission to sort of bring that part of herself to her playing. And then if it's okay for me to just share one other thing, when I first got really serious about combining movement with music, I was playing in a company called Tails and Scales, and we did new music, new theater for children and families. And everything we did was fully choreographed. And so when the first time I did a quote unquote normal flute recital after that, I found myself just standing at the music stand, like perfectly still, like a statue, because if it wasn't choreographed, I wasn't sure what to do. And I had to sort of give myself my own permission to move to move without planning how the movement would go. So it was kind of a funny, it was just a funny moment for me in my development to be like, oh, right, this is what I actually do.
I love that word, permission. It's so empowering.
Absolutely.
And Emma?
Yes, I was just going to jump in and say that for me, this discovery that the body is the first instrument has played into such a large role as to why I want to include movement in my practice. It doesn't always have to show up in the performance part of things, but the response to the music and the understanding of the music through the body, and whether it's a student who's struggling with a rhythmic idea or learning that a phrase has a shape that you can actually move or feel or prepare with the body, has been so informative to my teaching but also to my own performance aspect, because in the Dalcroze work, we don't often choreograph things very much. And so as I've grown in the movement aspect of things and started to work with people who do choreograph, I've realized, wow, this is like different parts of our brain. There are parts where we really, we choose to move or we choose not to move, whether it's Mendelssohn or we've choreographed a piece. And then there's parts where we're responding in some way to the music. And I used to be a player who would move too much, at least according to the teachers I was working with, and they would try and get me not to move. So I got very kind of tight and locked in my playing. And the development of movement that's purposeful and useful to playing and or to expressiveness of the music that we're working on, I think can really inform our growth. And so for me, what I have noticed in my little ones, because I teach music together and I teach Dalcroze classes and I've developed curriculums for ages, 0 and up, that these kids, when they're exposed to this idea that the music is created with their body, whether it's movement or a song or movement while they're singing and then transferring that to instruments, it feels like a very organic thing to them. And they could be age 9, 10, and 11 when they're finishing our curriculum and doing stuff that I work with professionals on developing. And for them, it's such a natural development for them. Like, of course, I've learned how to do 2 against 3. I can walk in 2 and clap in 3. And that's just because this is part of the training that I've, been working on. And this is part of what the music is telling me to do. And it also feels really easy for my body. Because my body has been an instrument the whole time. And so then they can carry that over more naturally into their instrumental studies or their vocal studies. And it's been really touching and, not without some jealousy that I've seen that if you have that connection open from the very beginning, it doesn't go away. It continues to carry through. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And I think most of us who teach with movement wish that we had had more permission when we were younger.
Yes, I second that.
I third it.
And Weronika?
This is Weronika speaking. Yeah, I have to say I'm just like really intrigued by all the things that have been shared so far. So I guess what I've been reflecting on recently is how it's something that Vanessa Mulvey pointed out to me. She's a body mapping teacher, and she said, you can't play an instrument without movement. And so if we don't have a knowledge of how our bodies move and how to move musically, then how can we ever hope to generate sound on an instrument? And so just to really be aware that the music is inside us first, and that the instrument is a tool to express the music that's already inside us. And if movement, whether it's moving your fingers or moving your breath, whether it's understanding how your feet stand on the ground and how your whole body is supported by the ground, and what kind of movements keep you in balance and what kind of movements generate tension that force you out of your balance. All those things are important to express what we have inside us. And you can, teach someone what buttons to press and where to blow on a flute to generate tones, but to really create musical expression, that person has to understand the music through their body first, and how that music moves their body. And I think then it becomes music instead of just a collection of sounds.
Yeah, so the flute is just an amplifier per se.
Yeah.
I love that. So how have you seen students benefit by learning movement within these lessons? I know we dabbled a little bit on this topic, but let's dive in some more.
Well, this is Kathy again, and I could talk forever, but why don't I just pick one example? My 12-year-olds they've been doing KinderFlute for 5-6 years, and this group of 5 have been together the whole time. And they just performed an arrangement of the Vivaldi Spring Concerto together, and they just did it at a competition. The judges, the comments were very interesting. They especially were impressed with how the kids interacted with each other, how expressive they were, and I have to kind of laugh because they began studying this piece about 4 years ago, but not with their flutes in their hand, with a parachute. And they would, so they knew the form really well. And when there was the loud parts and the soft parts, and the dance-like beginning of it, and the flowing brook and how the parachute moved with that, and then the rumbling thunder and how exciting that was. Then 4 years later, them performing it and being very excited about performing it, you could just tell that they were playing from their heart and their experience, and not just fingering things and playing notes. And I think it was very clear to the judges that there was something very special going on with this group.
Thank you for sharing that experience. Zara?
Yeah, that's really cool to hear about. I would say it's interesting. A lot of the times I get to really do a lot of movement with kids, it's in a more limited time frame. Like I will be teaching a group of kids how to dance the minuet while playing the minuet, or working for a particular performance, and then sort of, and maybe that'll be at a flute camp or something, or a Suzuki Institute. And so I often don't get to see the sort of long-term benefit of that level of incorporating movement. Although I will say at the time, it's just such a great way to get the whole package going, to get the feeling of the music, to get the meter, to get the excitement of performance manifesting in the whole body, not just in the flute sound. But I will say in my private teaching with kids of all ages, and I'm a Suzuki teacher, and also I teach at the Manhattan School of Music pre-college with very serious high school and junior high students many of whom are on a path to professional study. Just using movement even to learn how to feel in a cello rondo by, walking down the hall faster and faster and faster and feeling, a thing I love to do with my students actually at Manhattan School of Music, because as a building in New York City, you can probably imagine it has these like long, narrow hallways. And so I will walk next to them and try and have them just keep up with me as I go faster and faster. And the first time they almost always just sort of end up sort of scurrying with their feet, trying to make their feet go faster and faster. And then we'll do it again, and I will put my hand on their lower back and sort of push them along with me so they can feel their center of gravity moving faster and faster, and how it makes it easier for their feet to keep up. And then we sort of talk about that as like, how we want the accelerando to happen, where it's not really happening because the fingers are moving faster and faster. It's because the beat is moving faster and faster. And that sort of, if they're moving from their musical center of gravity, the way they would, where their body moves from their physical center of gravity, that they can, then they can make an accelerando happen painlessly. And, so that kind of thing is a great way for me to use music, to use movement with individual students to sort of really, I think, quite good effect for their musical development. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I love it. Especially just putting your hand on their back so that way they can physically have perhaps a different sensation of experiencing it. I love that. And Emma?
Well, as Zara was talking, I was thinking about some of the exercises I've developed with my kids for understanding what a musical phrase is, because I think that concept of being more musical, we can often tell our students that we want them to be more expressive or more musical, but for them to actually be able to experience it and feel it. I was thinking about an exercise that we sometimes do in a Dalcroze classroom where you have a partner and an elastic between your two partners, and one partner leads pulling the elastic for the length of the phrase, and you can feel the tension and you can see the phrase growing. And then the next person is the one who leads the next phrase. And so you can actually practice the change of phrase, hearing where a phrase changes, whether there's little phrases or phrases within a larger phrase. And for my students, the work with then learning how to breathe and how to really bring that expressivity and the growth into their sound can really transform because they have an experience of seeing it and feeling it. Another example I love to use with my kids is that I'll place hoops on the ground. And so for each new phrase, they have to change where they're standing. So they'll play one phrase in a green hoop. And then when the next phrase comes, they move over to the red hoop and the next phrase, and so on and so forth. So they have to actually make a really concrete decision and show where they see and feel the phrase shifting.
No, that's great. It reminds me of two things. One, Christina Jennings does a class, and I've participated where she teaches this movement and the stretching, like you were saying, Emma, with the hue fantasy. Has anybody seen this class or?
No, but I
want to.
Yeah, and it's choreographed, and there's different groups, and then these different groups decide how they want to move to each of the phrases, and so on and so on. But that reminded me, Emma, of what you were saying. Weronika, any thoughts on this question?
Sure. Thank you, all of you, for sharing your ideas. I want to come and take your classes and come learn from you guys too. I think we often, when we in the classical music world, we are very score driven. So the music, we are told, exists on the piece of paper in the abstract dots and lines that we call the musical staff and musical notation. And what movement does is it helps remind me that the music really, it's much closer to learn the music through movement and through sound, and then to use that piece of paper as a reminder of something that we already know. And so that when you get a new piece of music and you do have to learn it from a score, you're really remembering that your job is first to take that abstract notation and turn it into something living inside you that you hear and that you move. And then you express it through your instrument, if that is how you choose to express it. So just an example of that, it just came from my own practicing and something I used with a student, kind of a parallel story where I wanted a new student to learn a piece, and he thinks he's a better reader than he really is. He's about 7 years old. And so I gave him the music for a song that we had worked on in music class together already. And when I played for him, like, this is your new piece of music, and I played it from the score, but it was a song that he recognized, his eyes lit up and he was like, I want to play that. He had a choice. Like, do you want to learn a new song that you don't know at all, or a new song that's like sort of new on the piano, but you already know it through movement? And it just really showed me that we love playing music that we've already connected with through movement. And similarly, when I was practicing, I got to a new page of my music that had a lot of black, and black notes. And then we just have that cringe, that initial like, oh my gosh, this is fast and hard. But to really take the time to sing through it in out of tune solfege syllables while moving the beat, really helped me be excited about it. And I picked up my flute to play it, and it wasn't as bad as I thought, because I already had a rhythmic impression of it, and I had a sense of whether the notes moved by steps or skips. And already that sound and movement experience helped me be much more comfortable when it came time to play it on the flute.
Wonderful. I remember a masterclass with Sébastian Jacot, and he mentioned something very similar to what you just said, Weronika, that if he can remember it in his body, he will be like 200% sure that it's there, as opposed to just using the visual aid as a reminder. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It also reminds me of sitting in orchestra rehearsal and you have 100 measures to count of rest. I think all of us in the wind section and back know this, but string players don't, that if you just count in your head, you're going to get lost inevitably. But if you count on your fingers, you always have like a physical representation of, okay, was it 7 or 8? Okay, good. My fingers know because I can see it on my fingers. They've been moving regularly. And string players, they rarely have that many rests. So when they have to count 15 rests, sometimes 15 measures, they get freaked out and lost. And I'm like, guys, just count on your fingers. And they're like, what? But that's babyish. I'm like, no, it's just, we can't trust our brains, but we can trust our bodies and our fingers.
And 15 is a high number. I mean, Kathy and I recorded her episode 90, and maybe you can say this better than me, Kathy, but just even like T and G, number 1, it goes up to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back and down in all the different keys. And so we're human. Counting up to 15 or 50 is really hard because we do really well with small chunks and those small numbers.
Yes, absolutely.
I love it. So moving on, how can we as flute teachers and music educators incorporate movement within our teaching?
This is Kathy, and I can just say, wow, there's so many different ways. I think Zara already mentioned teaching the minuet. We teach how to waltz for the young children. We have a little mat that we draw where their feet are, where 1 is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We actually do 6 so they can keep counting a little square, and they just practice with that to start with, because so many things in 3, 4, just feeling that and then being able to play along. That's one of the early things we do with the kids. They first learn to waltz, and then we'll put on not only simple pieces that they're playing, but I'll put on Coppelia or something like that, and we waltz to it. It's especially fun for them to waltz to because the story where they're holding the little doll, like the mannequin, the silly story that's all based on. More mature, just to inspire them into where they're going and what they're doing. I have them do the Poulenc Sonata, not play it when they're 7 and 8, but we do it with Scarves. And the kids get so excited about it. I often get, when can I play this? So what do I have to do to get to play this? They're so excited. It's very inspiring. Not only are they learning beautiful phrasing and the feel of it, and they're developing a love for our literature already. Things like in their books that they do with me, they have pieces like The Hall of the Mountain King. And the story behind that is so much fun. There's a lot of repetition in it, a great time to learn, reinforce just keeping a great beat. But they also love, toward the end, just improvising, movement and chasing and that energy. We do a lot of marching with our groups. The kids will play those 5-note patterns that we just talked about. And at first, we'll be marching each note to the beat. Dum, bum, dum, bum, bum. And they like to take turns who's leading the march, and we go all over the place. I also, and then they do it at a second level. They're still marching at the beat, but they're playing 8 notes or 2 notes per. And then we go to 4 notes per step, and they love doing this. It's so much fun. Sometimes I'll tell them when they practice this 5-note pattern, what they're going to do. They're going to march through the house, all through their house, and when they get back, then they go to the next one. So instead of saying you're going to practice this for a minute or 2 minutes, it's a lot more fun that way. We also, items we use are parachutes, scarves. They love using scarves, ribbons. For something like Hall of the Mountain King, they love to use ribbons. We love to sit in a circle and do either passing the beat with our hands around the circle to each other or using cups. We do, you can take any march and be kind of passing the beat. This is very Dalcrozian, where you have one hand up and one hand down into your person on your right's palm of their hand. You're tapping into it and just passing that beat of the march And then doing fun things like we do a salute on beat 8, which complicates it a lot, but it makes that feeling, that phrasing very natural. I also do it, I have it on a little app where something, a march like National Emblem, which is a slow march. It's much harder to keep a beat on something like that. So I'll just keep slowing the beat down and down and down and down. And they have to fill, with their movement, they have to fill that long beat up so that they're accurate coming down. I could go on forever, but I will stop because I want to hear what everybody else has to say. I'm enjoying this so much.
No, that's wonderful. Some really great tools. Zara?
Yeah, I think, we've all talked in the answers to other questions also about these sort of very specific musical skills that you can learn through movement. And I guess I would want to also add that I think there's a way to use movement in a way that requires no training on the part of the teacher and really can be useful for liberating and encouraging the student's creativity. So sometimes I might just ask, well, what do you think this gesture would look like? If you were a ballerina, how would you move? If you were a choreographer, how would you make this happen? Or even be more, if you have a student who's more of an athlete than a dancer, like, what does this remind you of in your track? Is this, how would you do this in a track practice? And in fact, I actually had a really fun lesson with a student who is a serious runner recently about like trying to get him to slow down. I was like, pretend I'm the worst track coach in the world. And I'm saying, okay, now run slower. And honestly, just finding a way to connect the flute to the body in a way that makes sense to the student. So whether it's sports or dance or just sort of moving your hand in an interesting way, I think it's an important way to sort of get the whole package going, like we've been talking about, and then taking it a step further when you can ask the student to think of their own movement. I got a chance to work with students at Manhattan School of Music last year on creating their own performance pieces out of either music that was already written or actually creating their own music to tell a story and to come up with movement that would work with it. And it was just so interesting and fun and creative to see these kids work. They were all pianists and two of them were serious table tennis players. So we created this little mini piece where they were pretending to play table tennis across a grand piano and playing with, sort of pretending to play table tennis with one hand and playing the piano with the other hand. And it was just so fun to see these kids who have been sitting at the piano playing, Chopin for the last 10 years to get them up and moving around the piano. And it just changes their relationship to the music and to their instrument. And I think anytime we can, again, to use the word, give permission or liberate kids to think creatively and at the same time be using their bodies to do it, like so that it's not just a thinking exercise, it's a physical reality, then I think we're really helping them progress as young artists.
That's amazing. I really resonate with what you said. Just a friendly reminder, you do not have to be a teacher that's actually certified in something like a certain training. That's a nice reminder. Emma, would you like to comment on that question?
Yes, I just wanted to say I really love the idea that we would use movement that is our own expressive images and movement that comes from our imagination. I think is extremely useful when we're trying to get students to own their own expression over a piece and find their own musical voice within a piece. Whether it's a young child and we relate the sounds to either characters or animals, or if it's an older kiddo and you're working with the idea of something that they're already doing in their athletic or their daily life. I think all of that can really help them find their voice and their confidence on stage to be super expressive for themselves.
Amazing.
And I just found that, the expression that the kids have when they are telling their own story with their own air and with their own images and through their own use of developing movement exercises to depict a piece, then it's really special. Then it's something that is really profound and at a really high level artistically.
Yeah, well said. And Weronika?
I appreciate what Zara said about that you don't have to have special training, because I think part of the reluctance that teenagers have to moving is that they realize there are people who are trained movers, that you go to dance class or movement class and you really train and become a skilled practitioner of moving your body. And so they realize that their movement is not at that level. And so, I think it can be really powerful to say your everyday movement, whether it's walking or riding a bike or swinging a door shut, because you're frustrated at your mom or something, not that I've ever done that, is a valid movement. And you're right, it is not a trained ballet dancer movement, but it can be connected to your music making. And it can help you be more expressive and make a sound that is connected to the real world.
And sometimes that training actually can go and play against what you're doing. Like my ballet training, I had to unlearn because ballet is very, not strict, but I'll use the word strict. There's some strict poses and it locks your body in a certain way. And unlocking my body took many years, and I'm still learning how to unlock my body from certain poses. So yes, I'm very happy that I had that ballet training, but at the same time, sometimes it's done more harm towards my music making and expressing myself through my flute. Maybe it was because I started at the age of 2, and maybe 2-year-olds are supposed to wiggle more.
Wow.
Right.
I think, looking back in hindsight, if I were to have children, would I have them dive into jazz or ballet when they are 2, that young? Or am I going to maybe allow them to get messy and wiggle their bodies like 2-year-olds should, and then maybe add on formal training? I don't know. I haven't, done enough research to actually state one way or the other, but it's just my own personal experience.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I am curious actually to hear from everyone on this panel about their thoughts on trained movement, maybe through dance or some other formal training, and maybe more spontaneous movement, because that seems like something that we keep referring to a lot.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Heidi, I found what you said very interesting, because I found older students, thinking of 12, 13-year-olds that start with me that have a strong background in ballet, often, not always, often have just a lovely sense of natural musicality. But it's interesting what you said, how you felt like you were locked in. Yeah, that would have been very frustrating. I know that I can still remember as probably a 3 and 4-year-old having this robe that we had gotten for Christmas, and it had this little large fuzzy things around the bottom of it, and I remember feeling like, oh, I'm a ballerina or a princess or something like that, and my sisters and I just dancing our hearts out to the sound of music and just being so expressive and enjoying that so much. That was very spontaneous, but I look back and think, I really do think that helped me be more musical, that freedom to dance like that, even though I was untrained.
No, there are a lot of benefits that I see first being a ballerina, and then going into music. I'm not going to completely bash it, but it's just interesting to see, like, I don't know, certain movements and certain things my body maybe doesn't naturally do just because of the strictness of ballet and that training. And I keep using that word strictness, and I don't mean to give the wrong impression, but I mean, those poses are very precise, you know, compared to maybe something more, not avant-garde, but more new age or contemporary.
Yeah, this is Zara. And I would say, I think it's funny, there's an analogy for me with folk music and classical music, because I, became serious about the flute in high school and had, serious musical training. And somewhere during my undergraduate, I started to do some folk dancing, and then eventually playing music for folk dancing. And try as I might, I could never really play the flute in a folksy way, and I could sort of analyze some of the ways in which I am not folksy and I can sort of imitate and produce, but I just can't not sound sort of clean and tidy when I play the flute, and I feel like it maybe is a similar thing with ballet. It's like, it's not, like you're saying, it's not so much that it's strict, but there's a sort of tidiness to the organization of the body in that way that it's very hard to let go. But to sort of put it in the bigger question that Weronika was asking about, the sort of difference between spontaneous movement and trained movement, is, I think that ultimately, and this is related to the ballet and other kinds of movement discussion and folk versus classical playing, is I think that, that's sort of it's this perennial both problem and joy of being an artist, is that you need training and skill to be able to express your spontaneous idea and your spontaneous and unique idea, and not just your ideas, but your feelings and whatever you have to let out. And yet you want this kind of creative freedom of expression, and at the same time, a highly developed level of skill to know that what you are putting out is getting across to the audience. And I think that's why we practice scales, and that's why we practice long tones, and that's why we practice, our opera arias, and it's so that we can get to that point, or sort of, get back to the childlike quality of direct expression through our bodies.
Thank you so much, Dave, for that very sentence. So powerful when you say it that way, that you said. I just want to say it again because I want to remember that you need training and skill to express our ideas and our spontaneous expression. That is beautifully said. And I will say it now to any student who complains about practicing scales.
Well, it's funny. I was just thinking about, I am a Suzuki teacher and now also a Suzuki parent, and my daughter is practicing cello, and, she was playing Twinkle. She was mad at me the other day, and she played Twinkle in a way that showed me that she was mad at me, and she was just gritting her teeth and crunching the bow onto the strings and making ugly sounds. And it was just like, in a way, I was so proud because I was like, oh, she's expressing her cello. Like, isn't that our end goal? And I think the same is true with movement. Is it allows us to express ourselves through our instruments.
That's amazing. No, that's amazing. And I tell my guests when they say something profound like that, I will be hitting repeat on that timestamp again and again.
Yes. You'll send me a transcript so I can remember it too.
Okay. Oh, shoot. So it looks like our conversation will be going from 5 ladies down to 3 because Emma is having technical difficulty due to a windstorm in Colorado, and Weronika has a prior engagement. So thank you so much, Weronika, for chiming in your ideas and your expertise. We so appreciate your time.
Thank you. I have loved being part of this conversation. I've heard of all of you, and I've heard your names out in the flute world, and it is such a pleasure to talk and exchange ideas. And I've just found so much inspiration and so many new ideas to try with my students and in my own learning. So thank you so much for having me. And I wish you all the best for the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Weronika.
So nice meeting you.
Likewise.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So Weronika just said, I have all these new ideas. So let's talk about that. What resources can we utilize to help educators bring movement into a flute lesson?
Well, I think every time I've gone to a convention or I have the opportunity to attend the NFA, the National Flute Association, or I get the opportunity to be at a music educators, so to talk to band directors, there are usually classes in music and movement there. And I just love going to those, and you learn so much. So there's a man named Fire Aubin, and I was at a convention where he did like 6 different classes, and he just has wonderful, lovely ideas. Probably there's much on YouTube, and if you specifically want to do scarves and parachutes and things like that, I know there's books you can get just to get your creative juices going. I think just using them to get an idea of what you might do, and then move on from there with your creating your own exercises.
Amazing. Zara?
Yeah, and I would like to, just as far as thinking about being a flute educator and a music educator who works with young children, I would just put also a little shout out to the Suzuki folks, many of whom use lots of movement in their teaching, and their whole teacher training setup is really thorough. So there's great opportunities to learn there. And also the Orff schoolwork method is actually the kind of music learning that I grew up in, and is very integrative of movement and music. And that's another great resource. And then I would also just, again, put another reminder that you don't have to be an expert. If you have an idea, you should just try it.
Yeah.
The worst that can happen is your student will look at you like you're a weirdo, and that's probably happened before anyway. So, I think it's really just important to just learn by doing, and in fact, that's one of the things we're hoping our students learn by using movement, and we as teachers can remind ourselves to just learn by doing and try something, and if it doesn't work, try something else.
Exactly. And I actually have one resource that I would like to throw out there. Dr. Sam Hood is a friend and a colleague of mine, and we finished our doctorates together in May of 2018. And his thesis is titled The Flutist's Map, Movement Applications for Practice and Performance. And so I throw that out there because he and I did an interview for episode 10. And so anyone who's really interested in his Dalcroze-based techniques and activities can check that out. And there are some really great videos that we put together. And my listeners know I like this saying, it comes full circle. So I'm going to say it because it really does come full circle. But so he and I, my podcast is, my thesis here, and his is MAP. Well, full circle, a year later, we get this social media blast that the flute studio at Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas, had listened to the podcast with his information on it, and they taught themselves the activities through the podcast episode. And so it was really cool to see how information is getting out there, maybe in a less traditional way, but information is getting out there, and his research and his activities were being incorporated and learned by these students, like what you were saying, Zadie, with no prior knowledge, and no training in Dalcroze, and they got messy and experimented and learned something new. So I think that's really neat.
Oh, I can't wait to listen to that podcast. What number was that again?
I believe number 10.
Number 10. Okay.
He also uses scarves and hula hoops and things like that. So it's interesting to see similarities with our discussion, Kathy, from your episode 90.
Yes. I love new ideas.
Perfect. Okay. Let's go more into, this interdisciplinary performer field. If a student were to approach an educator stating that he or she was interested in becoming an interdisciplinary performer, how can we guide them?
Well, I probably would first tell them, look on YouTube.
Yeah.
And look at some performance by Zara and Erika and other people out there. But then not only just use that as a springboard to what they might do and their gifts and how they can use their gifts to make up their own, be creative and make their own interdisciplinary performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
Zara?
Yeah, and I would really echo that and just come back to this sort of what's becoming a refrain for me of if you have an idea, try it. And you don't have to have prior training. And it's always good to just do experiments and learn by doing. But I would say if someone is really thinking of this as a career path or as an important part of the way they want to perform professionally, especially, that it is of great value, yes, go for it. Yes, you don't have to have any sort of specific training. And honestly, there is no specific training yet towards being an interdisciplinary performer. But there are people who have more experience in the field. There are experts out there in theater and dance, and you don't have to rely on musicians to be your theater and dance coaches. And if you are serious about sort of creating it as a viable art form for yourself and your audience, I think it's really important to input from experts in the field, and when possible to have an outside eye working with you, at least in the early days, because we get so involved in our own ideas and in practicing in our practice room and in what we think is going to work, and it's really hard to know. And I think especially if you have a high level of music training, at some point you do start to be able to judge, like, oh, okay, I'm in tune. It sounds good. I know I'm getting my musical points across, but I still don't know if my movement looks good. I mean, I'm still an amateur in my movement compared to my sense of my own music. And I, whenever possible, work with a choreographer or a theater director or some kind of coach, at the very least, to just see what I'm up to and tell me what they're getting from the performance so that I can know if I'm on the right track. And, at best, really working with them as a collaborator so that the product is more than just, my cool idea. It's my cool idea plus expert collaboration. So I'd advise just go for it and then get help.
I love it.
Can I say one other thing about that? I think, especially if you're in music school, there are probably resources available to you. Many music schools have also a theater department and a dance department, or if not, there's probably an opera director. Some of my most fruitful work has been with people who are trained in opera because they kind of get the whole package, including a really deep understanding of the music. So opera is a great place to look for those outside eyes who can guide.
No, some really great advice. I love it. And speaking of resources, I did not know that this was a degree or a field, but when I was finishing up my studies at Texas Tech in May of 2018, for some reason, I must have been under some horrific spell. For half a second, I thought, oh, I'm going to continue and stay here for another year and a half and get my PhD. And thankfully, I zapped out of that real fast. But I say that because I started this other program as I was finishing the DMA, and I'm so glad I did for one semester pursue it because I got to take a class from Dr. Heather Warren Crow, and she is an assistant professor of interdisciplinary arts. So we're talking about, check YouTube, check your choreographers and your dancers at your school. You might want to check a professor of interdisciplinary arts. So I didn't even know that was a thing, and it is. So for students out there who want to collaborate and bring in film and the visual arts with the movement, with the playing the flute, there are people out there who specialize in such things.
We live in such an exciting time.
Right?
45 years ago, we were so narrow-minded in what performances were, and we were so orchestral. Being prepared for playing with an orchestra was our main focus. And it's so exciting the way there's so many options and possibilities, and we've just broken out of the box, and the creativity is over the top. It's wonderful.
And somebody to check out also is Hilary Abigana through the Fourth Wall Ensemble.
Totally.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
She speaks so highly of you, Zadie. She was like, oh my gosh, do you know Zadie Lawler? I'm like, actually, I get to have 2 episodes with her later in November.
Well, she and I both basically got our start in the same place. So this ensemble that I played in was called Tails and Scales, and I was there for 8 years. And when I left, she replaced me in the company. Oh. So she and I literally have the exact same background in getting to combine music with movement. I mean, we don't have the same movement background. She has ballet training, and I have folk music, folk dance, and gymnastic training. So that, in that sense, it's different. But yeah, she and I we're on the same path there.
Cool. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Very neat. Any last thoughts that you ladies would like to share? I know we covered a lot, but sometimes I feel as a podcast host, I say, that's a wrap. And everyone goes, no, I want to say this and this. So I want to make sure I give you one last space for sharing anything you wish.
I would just encourage again that not to be afraid of trying this. I know when we have the teacher training classes, I have the teachers just with a short little piece come up with some movement activity, and then we all discuss it, and it often morphs into something quite wonderful. But what I find out is that though they were scared to do it the first time, often they just develop into these wonderful, creative people who are coming up with incredible ideas. And I think you just need to get your foot started and go for it, and the sky's the limit.
Love it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I feel like this has been a really thorough discussion. So I guess I would just actually echo what Kathy was saying about it being a sort of exciting time in that things are really opening up creatively in our field, and that music and movement is now a movement, and it's just it's a cool thing to be part of, and it's a great time to be experimenting with this. So yeah, go for it.
Nice. So the last segment of the show, I do a portion called Picks. What is your pick today, Kathy?
Well, I think I'm going to keep a little bit within the topic here and recommend this book by Dr. John Ratey, a physiatrist from Harvard. It's called Spark, and it's a relatively easy read, but it's all about how movement and developing new neurons in your brain, and the research he's done, but just really practical applications. I think it's really changed my outlook of how I do lesson plans, and in my own life too, the importance of just aerobic activity.
Love it. Zara?
I saw this on the on the list of questions, and I was like, I don't know what my pick is. And then but I think what I will offer is a PBS Kids show called Peg plus Cat.
Okay.
My daughter is obsessed with it, and I have to confess that I am as well. It's a show that's ostensibly about math, but they use music masterfully. And they have an episode called The Magic Uke, which is like a 10-minute retelling of the Magic Flute. Really, and it's like, it is so well done. I can't even tell you. They have an episode called The Bouncing Ball, which is about musical meter. And it covers pieces in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and then all the way back down. And it's, there isn't actually a word of explanation in the show. They just cycle through music that has longer and longer and longer bars, and then shorter and shorter and shorter bars. It's so brilliant. So I highly recommend Peg plus Cat.
I love it. How neat. And to bring it from Kathy's book to Zara's PBS show, I'm going to round it off with food. And my pick for today is Greek food, since I am in Greece right now. And if you have not tried their moussakas, their Greek salads, and their Slouvakis, oh my gosh, you are missing out. I keep telling my family and friends that when I come back in May 2020, I might be 100 pounds heavier.
Not if you keep moving while you play the flute.
There's,
That's right.
There's the full circle. Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much. I wanted to do this in the beginning, but I completely forgot because I was so excited about the topic and discussion. But thank you, ladies, and to Emma and Weronika, who had to leave. Thank you so much for your time, energy, and talents. I cannot do this podcast without your willingness to participate and to share. So we, the listeners, and myself, thank you so much.
Oh, our pleasure.
Yeah. Definitely. And you're welcome. And thanks for having us. It was a really great discussion.
Yes, it was a lot of fun and so much was learned. I learned so much, and I think the listeners will find a ton of gold nuggets to pull from our conversation.
Wonderful.
Have a great Sunday afternoon, and we will be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi.
Great.
Thank you, ladies.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Do you love seeing children excited about learning music and playing the flute? KinderFlute classes are carefully designed to create a love of learning. During the teacher training classes, flute teachers learn how to integrate games and movement into their classes to both motivate and maximize learning potential. The movement activities and games are foundational to helping the students maintain a keen sense of alertness. Not only does KinderFlute motivate students, but also the teacher training classes has energized and transformed many studios. The ideas from the teacher training classes can be applied to students from ages 4 through 12. The next U.S. training class will be this summer, July 8th through the 11th, but it's not too early to sign up. The available spaces are limited, so it's best to sign up as early as possible. They will be held just north of Pittsburgh, and the housing is at the beautiful Eden Hall at Chatham University. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBigay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.